Good morning. This is Micajah Jackson, your host for the JFK Report. I am doing a class assignment. It's a benchmark assignment for my political theory class. I am set to graduate in 2 weeks. This is the benchmark assignment. The topic of the assignment is the American Dream, to discuss either the Republican or the Democratic Party, the history, the origins of it. And I decided to discuss the Democratic Party. There's a lot of history with the Democratic Party, a lot of, minus the stigmas about what's going on now in today's society in the United States. The Democratic Party has a great, rich history to it, and even some dark history to it. But I'm going to talk about just the good, rich history of the Democratic Party and where it's at now in today's American society. So to begin with, the Democratic Party, you could say it was founded, like when it separated in 1828 with Andrew Jackson, with some help with Martin Van Buren. But before that, Thomas Jefferson wanted to split away from the Federalist. And the Federalist didn't like that, so Thomas Jefferson went with the Democratic Republican Party. And then in 1828, that's when Andrew Jackson went with the Democratic Party and pretty much took over it and made it what it is during that time and where it is now in the 21st century. And the opponent of the Democratic Party would be the Whig Party. They were very conservative, traditional. They did their own thing. But what's unique about the Democratic Party and how it formed, especially with Andrew Jackson, he was a populist, a very devout nationalist. He cared about the common working people. So farmers and ranchers during the 1830s, leading up to going into the 20th century, but with the Democratic Party. But Andrew Jackson, populism. So a lot of poorer people in cities, farmers, ranchers, Catholics, specifically Irish Catholics and some Irish immigrants. They heavily supported Andrew Jackson and the Democratic Party and what they were representing. Andrew Jackson with the Democratic Party was very anti-elitist. He did not like the government intervention and the government corruption and taxes and especially the bank system. He shut down. So what we consider the Fed now in the 21st century, let's say that existed, that name, when Andrew Jackson was the president. It wasn't called the Fed, but the banks were part of that system. He shut them down because of what they were doing, and he changed the banking system because of what he was representing. He was representing those voices that were not being heard across the country. So, like I said, poor farmers, Catholics, Irish immigrants, and poor factory workers in the cities. So that's how you get the start of the Democratic Party, starting to back Andrew Jackson. A lot of people want to call it the Jacksonian democracy or the Jacksonian Party, kind of a nickname for the original Democratic Party. Their symbol is a donkey, which is kind of funny when you think about it, when you think about Jackson, with the donkey. If you get it, you get it, Because Jackson was somewhat of a mean guy, but the nickname for someone who's a donkey and they're a jackass, so you get it. But it is. But yeah, so the Democratic Party, and during that time, when you think about Andrew Jackson, very nationalist, loved America, loved what he was representing. The people loved what he was representing about America and getting down to the people that matter the most, that make this country thrive. The farmers, the ranchers, the factory workers, the Irish immigrants that were really shaping the country during this time period. So him just being a voice of those people, he was representing the minorities of the American country, which you still see the Democratic Party doing this today in today's society, representing immigrants, minorities such as the Black community in our big urban cities. So there's a lot of deep, rich history into it that I like and what they were representing. Even the Democrats, they would have liberal views, but also conservative views. Andrew Jackson, he was a populist, a devout nationalist, but he conserved. He really he cared about the farmers. He wanted them to conserve land, to help out the country, the factories, the Irish Catholics. So, and not even just conserving those, but conserving the American values at that time. So, that's what I would say in the beginning of how this Democratic Party formed and what they were doing. Then, it leads on through history. You get let's see here. You get a party division starting around the 1850s when the Whigs and turning into the Republicans, abolishing slavery and advocating for it. You had the Civil War, then you had bits and pieces here. Then you get into Woodrow Wilson going into World War I and lost a landslide election in 1920 that went Republican. And then about the 1930s is when you get FDR with the Great New Deal, with these social programs. The social program, passing Medicare, Medicaid, one of the first two. The big one's Social Security, my bad. So Social Security was the big one he passed with the New Deal. But as you see, I have Andrew Jackson here and John F. Kennedy. When I think about the Democratic Party, I think of Andrew Jackson when it comes to nationalism, representing those small groups, the farmers, the Irish Christians and the Catholics, representing those people that cannot be heard, and just loving this country and being anti-elite. It was just anti-elitism. They did not like the elites and the big government coming after you. Don't be screwing over these smaller people that are helping this country, that are doing everything they can to make America thrive. But then you go into John F. Kennedy with his charisma and the same sort of nationalism, but also his social movement of civil rights and liberties, where everyone, we're treated equal. We want the same representation. We want to be able to go to the same schools. We want to be able to go vote, not be harassed. And just in the 1960s, whoever thought we were going to go to the moon? John F. Kennedy and his administration put man on the moon. That's inspirational. Where is that talk today from today's Democratic Party? What about equal representation from today's Democratic Party? What about John F. Kennedy and during that time battling a somewhat Cold War against communism? Now we're going to get into the fact of where is this Democratic Party today in America? Communists and socialists have infiltrated the Democratic Party with their ideas, their beliefs, institutions, universities, actual elected members into state legislators and Congress, either supporting the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, or the Communist Party of America, where they donate money or they support some of their colleagues in there that are not elected, but they're buddies. Where you see Bernie Sanders open about forms of socialism. And what we're seeing, this is the problem with this movement and where the Democratic Party has been infiltrated by socialists and communists is it resembles and rhymes much like the Russian Revolution of the Bolsheviks in the early 20th century, which should be frightening to millions of Americans, because the Bolsheviks were violent people. They took over institutions. They took over federal departments. Well, not federal department. I'm thinking of but czar monarchy departments, whatever their government, whatever they had during that time. And you see what's going on here when they're going into our universities. There's professors. Now you see them in these DAs all over America. You see state legislators getting elected. You see members of Congress in DC and prosecutors, judges leaning a certain way with their socialist beliefs. And you see where their money's being funded to or who's funding them. That's a problem. And what's in it, the here at the Pew Research, um, about capitalism and views on socialism and capitalism. All right, so when it comes to favoring socialism and being anti-capitalism, so right here, the Democrats, for democratic socialism, it's a 33% somewhat favorable and very favorable at 25%. For this regular socialism, 35% somewhat favorable, very favorable, 17%. And there's only 8% of the socialism that is not supported by Democrats is very unfavorable. That should be a concern. But what also we should be concerned about is the numbers of, there's a high number of independents still and Republicans that have support for this. So they're okay, well, maybe it's not as high as the Democrats, but Republicans, 7% for both Democratic and socialism. But there is a very high number of 74 and 69% of being unfavorable. With independents, you have 25% favoring it, 35 unfavoring it. But you look at those numbers, you add all those up with Democrats, independents, and Republicans that all support a form of socialism. That's concerning. That is concerning. Because let's say you get more Republicans supporting just socialism, what's stopping them from going to fascism? Or even the Democrats doing that? Because you have socialism, you have communism, which I 100% believe they are two different entities, but they can go into either fascism or communism. You just don't become a socialism, you stay there. You go a certain way where your ideas go, and you get to that dystopia, utopia, whatever you want to call it. So how did we get there from being Andrew Jackson, Love in America, representing minorities, anti-elitist, do what you could do for your country, not what your country could do for you, John F. Kennedy, taking man to the moon, civil rights, very anti-communist until the 21st century. Now we're the Democratic Party supporting socialism and communism. And, it is frightening, and you see it all over in their institutions, especially universities. We got to get away from that. And we could bring the Democratic Party back. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is running for president. He would be a great choice for the Democratic movement and party to get away from these anti-elites. Well, not anti-elite, but getting away from the elitism, these pro-elites, all these people that are funneling money into these socialism and communism organizations across America, hold elected officials and bureaucrats accountable, especially if they have any ties to any of these organizations. The Democratic Party was representing America and the voices that were not being heard. Yes, there are some dark instances with the Democratic Party when it comes to the KKK, the Civil War, and Jim Crow during the early 20th century until it ended in the 1950s or 60s when it was officially done with Jim Crow. I get that, but there's also good of this Democratic Party. And there's even been some good of the Democratic Party in the 21st century. You could go back in the early 2000s where, Hillary Clinton was open about building a border wall on the U.S.-Mexico border. But now 20 years later, it's just, yeah, we're not doing that. Yeah, we're not doing that. We're not going to support that. Like, how do you switch from that belief or wanting to do that to doing this so quickly? And it is concerning, and you see a lot of these Democratic Party members weaponizing the federal government, with the DOJ, the FBI, the ATF. They're coming after your First Amendment, your Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment. It's concerning what's going on here with this new form of a democratic affiliated party with these evil socialist and communism ideas. It is very Bolshevik-like. And when that finally comes out, it's going to be a scary time because that form of revolution is violent and it's dark. It is not pretty. And they will come after anyone unless you bow down to their mob and become a part of them. And that is not the American idea that Andrew Jackson stood up for or what John F. Kennedy stood up for. The Democratic, I've never been a Republican or a Democrat. I've always been registered as a libertarian and now independent so I could vote in primaries. So I could take good and bad from either one, but with the Democratic Party, how it comports to my idea of the American dream is I grew up in rural America. My Jackson ancestors, and to be clear, Andrew Jackson is a documented ancestor of mine. We have documented paperwork, sealed and locked. He was a cousin to my great ancestors that were Quakers, and we ran underground railroads when we were living up in Rochester, New York, before we moved to Montana, where we've been there since 1865, ranching. So being from rural America, in Montana, where my family's been farming and ranching for centuries, dating back to Scotland, to moving to Ohio and growing up next to farmers, where these voices are not heard enough. To my stepfather and my stepfamily, where a lot of my family working factories, like my mom worked in factories here and there. These voices need to be heard. Then the Catholics of America, especially the Irish Catholics, the Mexican Catholics, the Latin Catholics, they have been democratic for years with supporting the party. And they're going against their own beliefs now. Just everything, beliefs, their tradition, their values. It just can totally flip-flop. We could change that, where they do represent these people, and they are acting in good faith, and they're ethical, and they want to put the American people first. That is the true Democratic Party American dream, is to represent the people that cannot be heard, and to be elected leaders that represent this country, and to stay away from these poison ideologies as in Marxism, communism, fascism, socialism, authoritarianism. That is not the American way. And we put America first by being nationalists that love this country and that want to be independent from other countries. That is the true American dream of the Democratic Party. Thank you.